very much to this listen and learn session, which is, I would prefer like dancing and shout session, but I'm not Edwin Collin neither. I'm just a guy from Barcelona that comes here to explain what have we learned during the actually still ongoing strategic plan for tourism 2020 that I was lucky to be the responsible, not just for writing the document, which you can find online and a lot of things, but also developing mostly of the part of the action of this document. Thank you, ETAG, for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be here. Okay, shall I? Okay, here. There's a lot of things that will resonate exactly the same here in Amsterdam and in Barcelona, because we are facing a global phenomenon and also challenges that are shared in many, many other cities. So maybe Barcelona or maybe Amsterdam had the challenge to face these issues before other cities, but I'm quite sure that you will get some things in common between them. So first thing, that to frame a little bit what will come next, is to, we had this global success narrative on tourism. The revenues, the GDP, the rankings, everything was really good, because that was what policies work about for the last 25 years, since the Olympics. But we had an issue here that this narrative doesn't stand anymore alone, because tourism has become not just a matter of success, but also a public issue. And as a public issue, has to be dealt also in a public way, so it becomes also politic, but it becomes also collective. And the challenges emerging from this are not the ones that we used to deal through a common tourism strategy, a sectorial one, I would say, a business-focused strategy. So that's what we started to do in Barcelona. Just 3 charts to frame a little bit the situation. One is the growth one. I mean, we keep on growing. We had a down peak because of the terror attack, but even after that, we keep on growing and growing and growing. And I have to say, this is not a matter of success of Barcelona. This is happening all over the attractive cities in Europe. It's not just exclusively from Barcelona, but the number of visitors has multiplied by 4. The number of accommodation have multiplied by 4. The number of vacation rentals have multiplied by to the infinite and beyond. Many things have grown. So this is not a matter of concern, of course, but it is not just the only storytelling we have to talk about, because there are other data that we can push and we can share and we can concern about. And this is, we have 2 surveys in Barcelona, one to residents and one to visitors. This is the one to the residents, and you can see that from 2014, actually 2012, people saying that Barcelona has to keep on attracting more tourists is decreasing, until the point that in 1916, for the first time, people saying that Barcelona has reached the limit. Overpass the people who said we have to keep on attracting. And if I don't have the data here, but it is very biased territorially. So the old city neighbors, it's a lot of time claiming to do something. And this do something, it is the challenge, because we are politicians, not magicians. We are technicians, but we don't control everything from a mixing console, and we can fade out and fade in the things as we would like to. It doesn't work like this. The other chart, it's about visitors' perception. And when they've been asked what's the best thing in Barcelona, they say it's a walkable city. It's a fantastic walkable city. You can go everywhere walking, and it's we are very glad to be here, to be like this. But then when you ask what's the worst part of Barcelona, they say there are too many tourists to enjoy the city. So tourists are claiming against over tourism, which is kind of a paradox. So what's the plan? What was the plan? The plan was, the main purpose of the plan is very similar to what Peter Jordan has just explained it to us. Much more, I would say, much less synthetic, because we had to make a kind of, at that moment, 2015, a lot of balance between the different situations. But actually, the main purpose was to improve the quality of life of city. And by managing the destination, by ensuring the sustainability, reconciling to the maximum all the elements at stake, and promoting the greatest possible social return of tourism activities, satisfying the enjoyment of visitors without jeopardizing residents' quality of life. And there are 5 force drivers that will frame the action of what we are doing. So we're not doing things that counterpose, for instance, redistribution of wealth. And by redistribution, we focus on labor force redistribution. I mean, on not a geographical redistribution, but on essentially to the embedded social economic relationships regarding tourism. And that is mainly a matter of how people get well paid from tourists. Not only this, but just as a matter. And it's a 2020 scenario, but there are no scripts. So what we have is to make a common arena to define which are the challenges and which should be the goals to face these challenges. And then this is the main thing. And then from there is an action plan that it's something really close to what I can see that you are doing here in Edinburgh, and I think you're doing well. The action can be contingent, can be conjunctural, but the goals have to be shared. Otherwise, you can do things that counterattack the other one. Sorry for my English. Okay, and then there was an integral urban destination management approach where governance was central to establish not just the institutional relationship, this partnership and networking, etc., but also how important was the internal coordination within the city council, within different departments of the city council. Because it has no sense to have a promotional office that makes things, and then it has to come the enforcement team to regulate the different things. So this internal coordination was central, and also the community engagement, and to include all the stakeholders, all the voices into not just the design of the agenda, but also for the accountability of this agenda. There are 5 main strategies, and then there were the will to make changes on some crucial tools, like funding, regulation and enforcement, urban planning. So urban planning, for instance, is not thought to deal with mobile phenomena like tourism. You can just think on maybe hotels or something that are fixed, but not people moving all over the city. So you have to make a strong reflection on how to deal, how to regulate, how to implement, how to think urban planning to solve tourism's challenges. So it's not just to put urban planning tools to manage tourism, but how to review these instruments in order to face new challenges. Some related outputs, just to name a little bit some of them. We have a regulation plan for hotels. We ban hotels in the city center. Yeah, that's what we did. We set up a tourism and the city council that was a formal participation group like this one, but not just with the industry, but also with the residents, with the cultural associations, with experts and academics and so on. And they join together twice a year minimum, and there are working groups facing problems, and there's an extraordinary place where to make this accountability of the government action. We are also boosting new initiatives through other rules, like putting in the center the need to empower communities through this new tourism development. And then, of course, for instance, communication or enforcement, we don't like this. We were one of the first cities, also with Amsterdam and Paris, that were really afraid of the effects of Airbnb. So we were very tough since the very beginning. Working groups to deal with the challenges surrounding attractions, what we called overcrowded spaces, like Sagrada Familia and Parkway, etc., joining together the public responsibles of these places, but also mobility, security, and so on and so forth, just to learn from one to each other, but also try to find out solutions in common. A meeting with a lot of cities in order to upscale the problem of the platform economy and the impacts of Airbnb in cities. We know we can not solve by ourselves. But we also know, as the Alderman Evans in Amsterdam told in this first meeting, that platforms need cities much more than cities need platforms. So this uneven relationship must be cut up and to set up a common agenda for cities in order to claim, in our case, at the EU, the common goals and the regulation rules. We regulate all these, what we call VMP, personal mobility vehicles, these scooters, segways, with strong restrictions and common ground, not just for tourism. And this is something that we have learned. This is for everyone, even for tourists. Or tiny design, decisions to, for instance, move the terraces to the pavement in order to free space to the pathwalk, because there's a lot of people going there from the coaches to the Sagrada Familia, and then this kind of tiny little things. And I'm finishing with three main learnings, I would say, and I'm now becoming a little bit academic, maybe. You can blame the organization to bring me here if you find so. But first of all, it's that during this process, we realized that tourism sets what I call an ontological dilemma. And this is, we have been many times saying, no, there are different perspectives on tourism. Tourism is a polyedric object, blah, blah, blah. And my opinion is that it's not a different perspectives from the same object, but different realities enacted at the same place. So when the hotel industry is saying tourism is good, for instance, and the neighborhood association saying tourism is bad, they're not talking about the same thing when they talk about tourism. And I think we have to acknowledge this and try to find some solutions for this by building common grounds to make these different realities, not just perspective, but also realities coexist. It's because there are many things that we're not going to get to a consensus. This approach on the consensus building, it's really important, but there are situations which are not possible at all. For instance, to allow or not allow new hotels in the city center. It was not consensus possible related to this topic. Also, and you know it for good, to broaden the agenda of what of all that is at stake. We don't talk just solely about revenues and so on, but there's a lot of things going on, even housing, even labor conditions, even social services, trying to help people who is working 40 hours a week. Maybe we have to open up the discussion and put it in the, not in the middle, but including all this in the discussion. And also, maybe we have to change some questions and also shift some matters. And facts are important, but concerns are much more important nowadays, I would say. And these concerns might be dealt also by a new, for instance, knowledge agenda, to acknowledge, to recognize that there are different realities that emerge or being enacted. I have said it already, but tourism is not a bounded economic sector alone, not so lonely. Of course it is. It is very important for the wealth of the city and for the prosperity, but it's not alone. It has become a collective issue. And so these collective issues require also political decisions. Who wins, who loses, given situation at stake. And I'm afraid that we are really fixed on this stakeholders approach, but it is not enough, because when it becomes collective, when it becomes public, there's someone else that is expecting you to solve the problems that he has no interest to talk about directly, because it's not directly affected, or he has no direct stake or interest on this, but is affected by, for instance, the overcrowd of streets. So, well, setting up working groups with crucial stakeholders is very important, but it is not enough, because there will be someone else who will talk on behalf of tourism, and it is not present to these spaces. And do not be afraid of maintaining this issue public, and do not be afraid of contestation and so on. We don't have to hide. We have to talk and accept that there are different positions. And last, I swear, tourism requires an integrated agenda, and that means that tourism issues won't be resolved through tourism policies solely. We need to integrate, we need to put tourism in the agenda of all the other agendas. As Peter has said, we try to connect and integrate tourism to a broader economic agenda. But there are other issues like mobilities, or housing, accommodation, for instance, or communication or reputation, of course. These are much more clear, but for instance, mobility should be, mobility issues related to tourism won't be solved by the tourism department, but has to be solved by the mobility department. So mobility has to know all these issues and how to face them, and not make things like, because they believe there are a lot of interests, there are a lot of actors, and have to work together. And and I would say, focus on moorings and practices and the effects of this, not just subjects. Because we tend to say, we want better tourists and we want them to do whatever. But actually what you can regulate and what you can induce are practices. You don't regulate subjects, fortunately. You regulate practices. So that's what you have to focus about. Prescription and prevention is much more smarter than enforcement and regulation. And this is something related with the need to shift from a demand marketing approach to a much more social marketing approach. What do we want tourism do? What do we want them to what's do we care about the revenues? Yes, of course. But do we care about other things? Yes, of course. So we have to integrate both them. We don't want them to behave badly, but to do so, we have to interpolate them not in a position like do not do that or do not do those, but trying to make them happy to do all other kinds of things. And then we have to be clear and just to slow down a little bit the expectations that we can deal and balance local conjunctures, but we are facing global dynamics. So there are many things that we don't control, and we have to prevent, we have to foresee, but there are many things that won't be solved just with a tourism strategy. And that were the points, and I'm glad to discuss them afterwards in this further panel. Thank you very much.